In a galaxy where physical prowess determines social hierarchy, humans are considered the weakest species, slow, fragile, and pathetic. On the prestigious Combat Academy planet of Valarax Prime, alien cadets from dozens of warrior races train in the ancient art of Nexus combat, a martial discipline that has decided the fate of empires for millennia. But what these superior beings don't understand about humans isn't our strength, our speed, or our natural weapons. It's something far more dangerous. Our ability to turn desperation into determination, humiliation into fury, and 13 seconds into a legend that will reshape how the galaxy sees Earth's children forever. Sometimes the greatest victories come not from those who never fall, but from those who refuse to stay down. The morning sun cast long shadows across the crystalline training grounds of the Valarax Academy as Marcus Chun adjusted his ill-fitting training uniform for the 100th time. The fabric, designed for the broader frames of Karathi warriors, hung loosely on his 16-year-old human frame. Around him, his classmates towered above his modest height. 7-foot-tall saurian reptiloids with scales that could deflect energy blasts, 4-armed Zilani whose reflexes were faster than most species could even perceive, and the massive Thraxian bear-like creatures whose single punch could shatter reinforced steel. Marcus was the only human in advanced Nexus combat, and everyone knew it was a mistake. "Look what the cleaning crew dragged in," rumbled Vextar, a particularly large Thraxian whose brown fur was streaked with the ritual scars that marked him as a warrior born. His massive form cast Marcus in shadow as he approached, his 3-inch claws extending slightly in what passed for amusement among his kind. "Still pretending to be a fighter, little pink thing?" The other students gathered around, sensing entertainment. Marcus had learned in his 8 months at the academy that alien teenagers weren't much different from human ones when it came to pack mentality and cruelty. The major difference was that these teenagers could accidentally kill him while barely trying. "I heard humans break their bones just from running too fast," chittered SYEH, insectoid Klaxon whose mandibles clicked with what Marcus had learned was laughter. "Is that true, Marcus? Do you need us to move slower so you don't hurt yourself watching us?" Marcus clenched his fists, feeling the familiar burn of humiliation in his chest. He'd heard every variation of these jokes over the past months. Humans were weak. Humans were slow. Humans were soft. Humans didn't belong among real warriors. The worst part wasn't that they said these things. It was that statistically, they were right. The average human could lift perhaps 200 pounds with training. Vextar species routinely lifted 2,000 pounds as children. Marcus could run perhaps 15 miles per hour at his absolute fastest. The Zilani could maintain 40 miles per hour for hours without breaking their equivalent of sweat. In every measurable category of physical ability, humans ranked dead last among the 47 species that made up the Galactic Federation. So why was Marcus here? Even he wasn't entirely sure anymore. The Academy selection process was supposedly merit-based, open to any Federation citizen who could pass the entrance trials. Marcus had squeezed through on a technicality. The tests measured technique and knowledge as much as raw ability, and humans had one advantage that served them well in written examinations. They were obsessive studiers. Marcus had memorized every combat form, every theoretical application, every historical battle strategy in the Nexus combat archives. But theory meant nothing when facing a Thraxian's claws or a Saurian's armored hide. "Attention, cadets!" The voice of Master Corvain boomed across the training ground. The ancient Saurian combat instructor was a legend throughout the academy, having served in the Frontier Wars and trained 3 generations of elite warriors. His green scales bore the faded scars of 100 battles, and his yellow eyes missed nothing. "Today we continue sparring evaluations. Each of you will demonstrate your progress in live combat scenarios." Marcus felt his stomach drop. Live sparring was always a disaster for him. In theory sessions, he could explain the 17 different counters to a Thraxian crushing grip. In practice, he usually ended up on his back before he could execute even one of them. Master Corvain's gaze swept across the assembled students, and came to rest on Marcus. There was something unreadable in those ancient eyes. "Chan," he said, his voice carrying across the training ground. "You will spar first." The whispers and snickers began immediately. Marcus felt heat rising in his cheeks as Master Corvain continued. "Your opponent will be Zarkoth." The snickers died. Even among this collection of apex predator species, Zarkoth commanded respect. The Saurian was built like a tank, with arms as thick as Marcus's torso, and reflexes that had earned him the top ranking in their class. His scales were so tough that practice weapons often broke against them, without leaving so much as a scratch. More than one student had required medical attention after sparring with him. "Master Corvain," Vextar called out, his voice carrying a note of false concern. "Are you sure that's wise? The human might break." "Yeah," added SYTH, mandibles clicking rapidly. "We don't want to have to explain to the human embassy why we sent their student home in a medical pod." The laughter that followed was cruel and pointed. Marcus stood frozen, feeling the weight of every eye upon him. He could back down. He could claim illness or injury. Master Corvain might allow it. The instructor had shown him small mercies before, though never enough to completely spare his dignity. But something in Marcus rebelled against the idea. Maybe it was 8 months of accumulated humiliation. Maybe it was the memory of his father's words when he'd left Earth. "Show them what humans are made of, son." Maybe it was simple teenage stubbornness. Whatever the reason, Marcus stepped forward. "I'm ready, Master Corvain." Zarkoth rose from his meditation pose with fluid grace that seemed impossible for something his size. The Saurian stood nearly 8 feet tall, his scales gleaming like green armor in the morning light. When he looked down at Marcus, there was no malice in his expression, just the mild interest a normal person might show when examining an unusual insect. "I will attempt to minimize damage," Zarkoth said, his voice a deep rumble. Among his people, this passed for kindness. The students formed a circle around the designated sparring area, their excitement palpable. This wasn't going to be a fight. It was going to be a demonstration of human inadequacy. Marcus could already hear the stories that would spread through the academy. "Did you hear what happened to the human?" Zarkoth dropped him in 3 seconds without even trying. Master Corvain raised his hand. "Combat rules apply. Victory by submission, knockout, or instructor intervention. Fighters, assume ready positions." Marcus settled into the opening stance of Form 7, the most offensive of the basic Nexus combat positions. It was designed for smaller fighters facing larger opponents, emphasizing evasion and counterattacks over direct confrontation. His feet were shoulder-width apart, his weight balanced on the balls of his feet, his hands raised but not clenched. Zarkoth barely bothered with a formal stance. His people were natural fighters. They emerged from their eggs with instincts that other species had to train for years to develop. He simply lowered his center of gravity slightly and flexed his claws. "Begin," Master Corvain commanded. Zarkoth didn't rush forward like most opponents Marcus had faced. The Saurian was too experienced for such crude tactics. Instead, he advanced with measured steps, his yellow eyes tracking Marcus's every movement. It was like being stalked by a biological tank. Marcus circled to his left, trying to keep the larger fighter from simply overwhelming him with reach and power. He'd studied footage of Zarkoth's previous matches and knew that the Saurian favored a devastating combination: a feinting claw swipe to draw his opponent's guard high, followed by a crushing grip that would end the fight immediately. The attack came faster than Marcus expected despite his preparation. Zarkoth's right claw swept in a wide arc toward Marcus's head. Marcus ducked and rolled to his right, but the Saurian had anticipated the movement. His left hand shot out like a striking snake, fingers spread to catch Marcus in a grip that would pin him helplessly. Marcus twisted desperately, feeling the wind from Zarkoth's grasp ruffle his hair. He managed to avoid the grab, but his desperate evasion left him off balance. Zarkoth pressed his advantage, his tail sweeping around to knock Marcus's legs out from under him. The human hit the ground hard, rolling backward to try to regain his feet. The watching students erupted in laughter and shouted commentary. 3 seconds, someone called out. I had money on 5. Maybe he'll last longer if Zarkoth fights with his eyes closed. This is painful to watch. Should we call a medic preemptively? Marcus scrambled to his feet, his face burning with embarrassment. Zarkoth waited patiently for him to regain his stance. It was considered poor form among Saurians to attack a downed opponent who was clearly outmatched. The gesture, meant as courtesy, somehow made Marcus feel even worse. You may yield, Chun, Master Corvain called out. There is no shame in recognizing a superior opponent. The words hit Marcus like physical blows. Noscham? When he was the only human representative in a class full of the galaxy's finest young warriors. When every stereotype about his species was being confirmed with each passing second. His father's proud face flashed through his memory, believing his son would make humanity proud among the stars. Marcus wiped blood from his split lip and assumed his stance again. I'm not done. Zarkoth tilted his head slightly, a gesture that among Saurians indicated puzzlement. You cannot win, small one. Why continue to suffer? It was a fair question, and Marcus didn't have a rational answer. By every metric that mattered, this fight was already over. Zarkoth was bigger, stronger, faster, and more skilled. Marcus was bleeding from a minor wound while his opponent hadn't even been touched. The smart thing would be to yield, accept the loss, and minimize the damage to both his body and his pride. Instead, Marcus found himself thinking about Earth. Not the Earth of human civilization, with its cities and technology and comfort, but the Earth that had forged his species through millions of years of evolution. The Earth where his ancestors had been prey animals, hunted by creatures bigger, stronger, and better armed than they were. The Earth where early humans had somehow survived ice ages and predators and disasters that had wiped out species far more physically impressive. How had they done it? How had weak, slow, soft humans managed to not just survive, but thrive in a world that seemed designed to kill them? Marcus charged. It wasn't a technically sound attack. It wasn't based on any combat form taught at the academy. It was pure desperation transformed in emotion, and it caught Zarkoth completely off guard. The Saurian had been expecting another careful, defensive approach. Instead, Marcus came at him like a guided missile, low and fast, and utterly committed to collision. Marcus's shoulder hit Zarkoth just below his center of gravity. The impact sent shockwaves through Marcus's human frame. It was like running full speed into a brick wall. But the angle was right, and physics was universal. Even Zarkoth's massive form couldn't ignore the laws of leverage and momentum. The Saurian stumbled backward, his yellow eyes wide with surprise. Marcus wrapped his arms around Zarkoth's midsection and drove forward with his legs, putting every ounce of his human stubbornness into maintaining forward motion. It was a completely unsustainable attack. Marcus's strength was already fading, and Zarkoth would recover in seconds. But for one impossible moment, the human was winning. The watching students fell silent, their laughter dying as they witnessed something they'd never seen before. Marcus Chun making Zarkoth work for his victory. Master Corvain leaned forward, his ancient eyes bright with interest. Zarkoth regained his balance and wrapped his powerful arms around Marcus, preparing to lift the human and slam him to the ground. It should have been over. Marcus should have been pinned, submitted, defeated once and for all. Instead, something extraordinary happened. As Zarkoth's grip tightened, Marcus didn't try to break free. Instead, he adjusted his own hold, sliding his arms up to hook around the Saurian's shoulders. Before Zarkoth could react, Marcus had locked his hands behind a larger fighter's neck and was pulling downward with every ounce of strength he possessed. It was a variation of an ancient human wrestling technique, adapted for the size differential. Marcus couldn't overpower Zarkoth's upward lift, but he could use his position to add his weight to the Saurian's top-heavy momentum. More importantly, he was bringing Zarkoth's head down toward the range where a human could actually reach it. Zarkoth realized the danger a split second too late. His people were excellent fighters, but their size and strength meant they rarely faced opponents willing to get this close, to sacrifice their own safety for a chance at victory. Marcus's knee came up just as the Saurian's head came down, and the impact was thunderous. The sound of the blow echoed across the training ground like a gunshot. Zarkoth's head snapped back, his grip loosening involuntarily. Marcus dropped to the ground, his own knee throbbing from the impact. Saurian skulls were notoriously thick, but Zarkoth was staggering, his coordination disrupted. For the first time in the fight, Marcus saw opportunity. Every instinct screamed at him to back away, to create distance, to return to the defensive patterns he'd been taught. Instead, Marcus stepped closer. Zarkoth was hurt, but not defeated. The Saurian's natural armor had absorbed most of the impact. Marcus had perhaps 3 seconds before his opponent recovered fully. 3 seconds to do something impossible. Marcus's hands shot forward, not in a punch or a grab, but in a precise strike to a point just below Zarkoth's left arm. It was a pressure point technique from Form 12, one of the advanced disciplines that most students wouldn't learn for another 2 years. Marcus had memorized the anatomy of every Federation species during his obsessive study sessions, but he'd never attempted to actually use the knowledge in combat. The strike hit perfectly. Zarkoth's left arm went momentarily numb, his defensive posture collapsing on that side. Marcus followed with a second strike, this one to a nerve cluster near the Saurian's right hip. Again, precise technique rather than power, targeting the few vulnerabilities that even armored species possessed. Zarkoth tried to recover, tried to bring his superior strength to bear, but Marcus was inside his guard now, too close for the Saurian's powerful limbs to generate full force. The human's hands moved like striking snakes, hitting pressure points, nerve clusters, anything that might disrupt his opponent's legendary coordination. It was beautiful and desperate and completely unsustainable. Marcus was burning through his limited energy reserves at a catastrophic rate. Each precise strike required total focus and perfect technique. The margin for error against an opponent like Zarkoth was essentially zero. Worse, the Saurian was adapting, his superior reflexes beginning to track and counter Marcus's attacks. But for 10 miraculous seconds, a human was making one of the Academy's top fighters look ordinary. The end came suddenly. Zarkoth finally managed to land a solid blow, a backhand that caught Marcus across the chest and sent him flying 6 feet through the air. The human hit the ground hard and didn't get up immediately, his breathing ragged and his vision blurred. But the silence from the watching students was deafening. Zarkoth stood in the center of the sparring circle, his chest heaving, his usually immaculate posture slightly disheveled. There was a respect in his yellow eyes that hadn't been there before. "You fight strangely, Marcus Chun," he said, his voice carrying a note of something that might have been admiration. "I have never encountered such tactics." Marcus struggled to his feet, swaying slightly. His body felt like it had been hit by a cargo transport, and he knew he looked terrible, but he also knew that something had changed. The laughter had stopped. The casual dismissal was gone. For the first time since arriving at the Academy, Marcus saw his classmates looking at him not as a pathetic joke, but as something else entirely. Master Corvain stepped into the sparring circle, his ancient face unreadable. "Interesting," he said, his voice carrying across the silent training ground. "Most interesting indeed." As Marcus limped toward the medical station to have his injuries treated, he caught fragments of whispered conversations among the alien students. "Did you see how fast his hands moved? Those pressure point strikes. I didn't even know humans studied advanced forms. He made Zarkoth work for that victory. Maybe humans aren't as weak as we thought." The fight was over, and Marcus had lost. But something else had begun. Something that would echo far beyond the training grounds of Valorax Academy. For the first time, the galaxy had seen what humans could do when they stopped trying to fight like other species and started fighting like themselves. And in 13 seconds of impossible fury, Marcus Chun had planted the first seed of what would become a legend. Word of the sparring match spread through Valorax Academy like wildfire. By evening, Every student on the massive campus had heard some version of the story. The details grew more dramatic with each telling, but the core remained the same. The weak human had done something impossible against Zarkov. Marcus discovered this when he entered the dining hall for dinner. The usual buzz of conversation died as hundreds of alien eyes turned toward him. He felt his cheeks burn as he made his way to the food dispensers, acutely aware of the whispered discussions following in his wake. "That's him," he heard a Karathi female say to her companion. "The one who made Zarkov stumble." "I heard he used forbidden techniques," another voice added. "Ancient human combat secrets." "My dorm mate said he moved faster than a Zalani," came a third whisper, which was obviously an exaggeration, but still made Marcus's heart race. He collected his meal, a bland nutritional paste designed to be digestible by all Federation species, and looked for an empty table. For 8 months, this had meant eating alone while the various species clusters maintained their social boundaries. Tonight, he was surprised to see Krell Knox, one of the Zalani from his class, gesture toward an empty seat at their table. Marcus hesitated. The four-armed Zalani were notoriously cliquish, maintaining strict hierarchies based on their lightning-fast reflexes and predatory instincts. Their social structure was built around respect for speed and precision, qualities Marcus had never demonstrated before today. "Chun," Krell Knox called out, his translator rendering his rapid, chittering speech into Federation standard. "Join us. We have questions about your combat style." Still uncertain, Marcus approached the table. The three Zalani seated there regarded him with their large, multifaceted eyes. Their four arms moved constantly in subtle gestures that conveyed complex emotions and social positioning, a language Marcus had never been able to follow. "Your hand strikes today," said Veltar, a female whose blue-green carapace gleamed under the dining hall's artificial lighting. The precision was unexpected. How do humans train such accuracy without proper reflexes? Marcus sat down carefully, still not entirely convinced this wasn't some elaborate setup for another humiliation. "We study," he said simply. "We memorize anatomy, practice techniques, repeat movements until they become automatic." The Zalani exchanged rapid gestures that Marcus couldn't interpret. Finally, Krell Knox leaned forward. "You mean you learn through repetition rather than instinct?" "How inefficient." "Maybe," Marcus agreed, taking a bite of his meal. "But it works eventually." "Eventually," mused the third Zalani, whose name Marcus had never learned. "Humans think in terms of eventually. We think in terms of immediately. Different approaches to the same goal." It wasn't exactly friendly conversation, but it wasn't mockery either. For Marcus, that represented significant progress. Their discussion was interrupted by the arrival of Vextar and two of his Thraxian companions. The massive bear-like aliens loomed over the table, their brown fur bristling with what Marcus had learned to recognize as agitation. "So the little human thinks he's a warrior now," Vextar growled, his translator struggling with the subsonic rumbles in his speech. "One lucky moment against Zarkov, and suddenly everyone treats you like you matter." Marcus set down his utensil and looked up at the towering Thraxian. "I never said I was a warrior. I just refused to quit." "Refused to quit," Vextar repeated mockingly. "How noble, how brave, how utterly pointless." His massive hand slammed down on the table, making the metal surface vibrate. "You want to see what real combat looks like, human? Challenge me. Let's see how your pressure points work against someone who's expecting them." The dining hall had gone completely silent. Every conversation stopped as hundreds of students turned to watch the confrontation. Marcus felt a familiar knot of fear in his stomach. Vextar was even larger and stronger than Zarkov, with a reputation for brutality that made him feared even among other Thraxians. But something else stirred in Marcus's chest, something that hadn't been there that morning. The memory of those 13 seconds when he'd made Zarkov stumble, when he'd proven that humans could fight back, when he'd shown that size and strength weren't everything. "Fine," Marcus said, standing up from the table. His voice carried further than he'd intended. and he saw students throughout the hall lean forward with interest. Tomorrow after classes. Public sparring ring. Master Corvain can officiate. Vextar's eyes widened slightly. He'd expected the human to back down. For a moment, uncertainty flickered across his features. Then, his usual arrogance reasserted itself. Perfect. I'll try to leave enough of you intact that the medical staff can piece you back together. As the Thraxian stalked away with his companions, Marcus sank back into his chair. His hand was shaking slightly, and he suddenly realized what he'd just committed to. Fighting Zarkoth had been survivable because the Saurian was disciplined, controlled, precise in his violence. Vextar was none of those things. Thraxians were bred for warfare, and they approached combat with a berserker fury that had made them legendary throughout the galaxy. You realize he could actually kill you, right? Veltar said quietly, her voice carrying genuine concern. Thraxians sometimes lose control in combat. Their battle rage is not easily contained. I know, Marcus replied, though his voice sounded far more confident than he felt. Then why accept? Krelnox asked. What do you hope to gain? Marcus thought about the question as he finished his meal. What did he hope to gain? He couldn't win. That much was obvious. Vextar was bigger, stronger, and more vicious than Zarkoth had been. The Thraxian wouldn't be caught off guard by unusual tactics, and he wouldn't show mercy when the fight turned against Marcus. So why had he accepted the challenge? The answer came to him gradually as he made his way back to his dormitory. It wasn't about winning or losing anymore. It was about proving something that went beyond individual combat, something about what humans could endure, what they could survive, what they could accomplish when they refused to surrender. His father had told him stories about Earth's history, about humans who had faced impossible odds and fought anyway. Not because they expected to win, but because someone had to stand up and be counted. Because backing down without a fight meant accepting that you didn't deserve to be there in the first place. Marcus spent the evening in the Academy's archives, studying every piece of footage he could find of Thraxian combat techniques. Their fighting style was brutally straightforward. They relied on overwhelming aggression, devastating power, and their natural resistance to pain and injury. They weren't particularly technical fighters, but they didn't need to be. When your claws could shred armor plating and your strikes could dent starship hulls, technique became secondary. But Marcus had learned something important from his bout with Zarkoth. Power and aggression were only effective if they could be brought to bear. The key wasn't to match his opponent's strengths. It was to create situations where those strengths became liabilities. By morning, Marcus had a plan. It was desperate, dangerous, and probably suicidal, but it was better than simply standing there and getting mauled. The public sparring ring was packed well before the scheduled time. Word had spread not just through the academy, but to the faculty and staff as well. Even some of the orbital merchants and diplomats who regularly visited the campus had come to witness the spectacle. A human challenging a Thraxian in single combat was apparently too unusual to miss. Marcus arrived early, hoping to avoid some of the attention, but found the ring already surrounded by spectators. Among them, he was surprised to see Master Corvain speaking quietly with several other instructors. The ancient Saurian caught Marcus's eye and nodded slightly, a gesture that could have meant anything or nothing. Chun, someone called from the crowd. Marcus turned to see Zarkoth approaching, his massive form cutting through the spectators with ease. A word before your fight. Marcus followed the Saurian to a relatively quiet corner of the ring area. Zarkoth studied him for a long moment, his yellow eyes unreadable. Yesterday you fought with intelligence, Zarkoth said finally. Today you will face an opponent who respects only violence. Do not attempt the same tactics. Vextar will crush you if you try to close distance. Then what do you suggest? Marcus asked. Survive, Zarkoth replied simply. Show them that humans do not break easily. That may be victory enough. Before Marcus could respond, a commotion erupted near the ring entrance. Vextar had arrived with an entourage of Thraxian supporters, their massive forms pushing through the crowd like mobile fortresses. The challenge fighter himself looked even more intimidating than Marcus remembered. His brown fur was meticulously groomed, his claws polished to razor sharpness, his scarred features set in an expression of predatory anticipation. "Where's my opponent?" Vextar roared, his voice carrying easily over the crowd noise. "Where's the little human who thinks he can fight?" Marcus stepped forward, feeling every eye in the arena focus on him. The size difference was even more dramatic than it had been with Zarkov. Vextar stood nearly 9 feet tall, with arms as thick as Marcus's entire torso. When the Thraxian smiled, his teeth gleamed like white daggers. "There you are," Vextar said with satisfaction. "I was afraid you'd come to your senses and run away." "I'm here," Marcus replied, proud that his voice remained steady despite the fear churning in his stomach. Master Corvain stepped into the ring, his presence immediately commanding attention. "This is a formal challenge match," he announced, his voice carrying to every corner of the arena. "Victory conditions are submission, unconsciousness, or instructor intervention. Both fighters have accepted these terms." The crowd fell silent as the two combatants moved to their starting positions. Marcus settled into the defensive stance that had served him well against Zarkov, but he knew it would be inadequate here. Vextar's approach to combat was less sophisticated, but more dangerous. He would simply overwhelm any defense through sheer violent force. "Any last words, human?" Vextar asked, extending his claws to their full length. The sound they made against his knuckles was like metal scraping stone. Marcus looked around the arena, seeing hundreds of alien faces watching him with expressions ranging from curiosity to bloodthirst to genuine concern. For 8 months, he'd been a curiosity, a mistake, a reminder of humanity's weakness compared to the galaxy's warrior races. Today, he had a chance to change that narrative. "Yeah," Marcus said, loud enough for his voice to carry to the crowd. "Let's see what 13 seconds can accomplish." The reference to his previous fight sent a ripple of excitement through the spectators. Even Vextar's confident expression flickered slightly. Whatever the human was planning, it was connected to whatever had surprised Zarkov. "Begin," Master Corvain commanded. Vextar charged immediately, his massive form moving with shocking speed for something so large. His approach was exactly what Marcus had expected, a straightforward assault designed to end the fight before it could truly begin. The Thraxian's claws swept toward Marcus in wide, devastating arcs that would have shredded any opponent foolish enough to stand still. Marcus didn't stand still. Instead of trying to block or deflect the attacks, he dropped low and rolled to his left, using his smaller size and lower center of gravity to stay beneath Vextar's killing zone. The Thraxian's claws passed inches over his head, close enough that Marcus could feel the wind from their passage. Vextar pivoted with surprising grace, his predatory instincts tracking Marcus's movement. His follow-up attack came even faster, a devastating backhand that would have taken Marcus's head clean off if it had connected. But Marcus was already moving again, not away from the attack, but inside it, rolling between Vextar's massive legs in a move that was equal parts desperation and calculation. The Thraxian tried to adjust, but his own size worked against him. He couldn't bend down far enough to reach Marcus without compromising his balance. The crowd erupted in surprised cheers as Marcus emerged behind Vextar, completely unharmed despite being within arm's reach of the galaxy's most feared close combat species. "Stand still and fight," Vextar roared, spinning around with impressive speed. His next attack was a crushing downward strike with both hands, a blow that would have driven Marcus into the arena floor like a tent stake. Marcus had been expecting it. Instead of trying to dodge to either side, he threw himself backward, rolling away from the impact zone just as Vextar's combined fists slammed into the reinforced metal floor of the ring. The impact was so powerful that it left visible dents in the surface. More importantly, it left Vextar momentarily overextended, his massive frame committed to the downward motion. Marcus reversed direction instantly, rolling forward and coming to his feet inside Vextar's guard. For one precious second, he was positioned exactly where he needed to be, close enough to the Thraxian center of mass to attempt something impossible. Marcus's hand shot forward, not in the precise pressure point strikes he'd used against Zarkoth, but in a desperate attempt at one of the most dangerous techniques in all of Nexus combat, the neural cascade disruption. It was a technique designed for use against heavily armored opponents, targeting not nerve clusters or pressure points, but the delicate neural pathways that control balance and coordination. The problem was that neural cascade disruption required perfect precision, exact knowledge of the target's species anatomy, and usually several seconds of sustained contact to be effective. Marcus had none of those advantages. He was working from memory, under extreme stress, with a moving target who would kill him the instant he realized what was happening. Marcus's fingers found the spot he was looking for, a point just behind Vextar's left ear, where the Thraxian nervous system converged in a cluster vulnerable to disruption. He pressed with every ounce of focus he possessed, trying to trace the precise neural pathway he'd memorized from his obsessive study sessions. For 3 seconds, nothing happened. Vextar was so surprised by the strange attack that he hesitated, trying to understand what the human was attempting. Then the technique took hold. Vextar's left side went completely numb, his coordination collapsing as his nervous system tried to process conflicting signals from his brain. The massive Thraxian staggered, his natural balance disrupted by the sudden loss of motor control on his left side. The crowd's roar was deafening. Even the most sophisticated spectators had never seen anything like this. A human using advanced neural disruption techniques against an opponent 3 times his size. But Marcus knew his advantage was temporary. Neural cascade disruption was devastating, but brief. Thraxian nervous systems were notoriously resilient, and Vextar would recover within seconds. Worse, the technique had required Marcus to get dangerously close to his opponent, close enough that even a clumsy counterattack could be fatal. Vextar proved this by swinging his still functional right arm in a wild arc, his claws seeking Marcus's throat. The human barely managed to duck under the swipe, feeling the wind from the deadly talons ruffle his hair. But the miss sent Vextar further off balance, his disabled left side unable to compensate for the momentum of his attack. The massive Thraxian stumbled forward, his usual grace completely absent. Marcus saw his opportunity and took it. Instead of trying to retreat to a safe distance, Marcus stayed close, moving to Vextar's disabled left side, where the Thraxian's reduced coordination made him most vulnerable. His hands moved in a flurry of precise strikes, targeting every vulnerable point he could remember from his anatomical studies. Nerve clusters at the elbow joint, pressure points along the spine, the delicate sensory organs that helped maintain balance. None of the individual strikes were powerful enough to seriously injure a Thraxian, but their cumulative effect was devastating. Vextar's already disrupted nervous system couldn't cope with the multiple sources of interference. His movements became increasingly erratic, his legendary berserker fury transformed into clumsy flailing. The arena fell silent except for the sounds of combat. Marcus was actually winning, not through superior strength or speed or natural weapons, but through knowledge, precision, and the desperate courage that seemed to be humanity's strangest gift. It lasted exactly 13 seconds. Then, Vextar's nervous system began to recover. The Thraxian's left side started responding to commands again, and with that restoration came the full fury of his warrior pride. He'd been humiliated in front of hundreds of spectators by a creature that shouldn't have been able to threaten him. The counterattack was swift and brutal. Vextar's newly restored left arm swept around in a backhand that caught Marcus across the chest and sent him flying through the air. The human hit the arena floor hard, rolling several times before coming to rest against the ring boundary. Marcus tried to get up and couldn't. His vision was blurred, his breathing labored, and he was pretty sure several ribs were broken. Vextar approached slowly, his claws extended, his fury evident in every line of his massive frame. Enough! Master Corvain's voice cut through the arena like a blade. The ancient Saurian stepped between Marcus and the advancing Thraxian, his presence commanding immediate respect. The human cannot continue. Victory to Vextar. The crowd erupted in a mixture of cheers and arguments. Technically, the fight had ended exactly as everyone expected. The human had been defeated by the superior Thraxian. But something fundamental had changed in those 13 seconds when Marcus had made Vextar stumble, when he'd shown that humans could fight back in ways that no one had anticipated. As Marcus was helped to the medical station, he caught fragments of conversation from the dispersing crowd. Did you see how he disrupted Vextar's nervous system? I didn't know humans studied advanced neural techniques. 13 seconds. That's how long the human controlled the fight. Maybe we should reconsider what humans are capable of. I want to learn that neural disruption technique. Imagine what a Saurian could do with that kind of precision. Lying on the medical station gurney, Marcus felt a strange sense of satisfaction despite his obvious defeat. He'd lost the fight, but he'd won something else. The beginning of respect, the seed of a new understanding about what humans could contribute to the galaxy's warrior culture. And in the Academy's archives, someone was already beginning to compile footage of the humans' unique fighting techniques, wondering what might happen if such unconventional methods were formally studied and refined. The legend was growing, one impossible 13-second sequence at a time. 3 weeks after his fight with Vextar, Marcus Chun had become the most famous student at Valorax Academy. The footage of his 13-second dominance over the Thraxian had spread throughout the galactic network, analyzed by combat experts, military strategists, and xenobiologists across dozens of worlds. Universities were offering research positions to study human adaptive combat methodology. The Saurian War College had requested formal documentation of his neural disruption techniques. But Marcus himself was more concerned with the fact that he could barely walk without wincing. The medical staff had done an excellent job repairing his injuries, but Thraxian claws left lingering damage that took time to fully heal. More challenging was the psychological impact of his newfound fame. Everywhere he went on campus, students stopped their conversations to stare. Some approached with genuine curiosity about human fighting techniques. Others seemed to view him as a fascinating specimen worthy of study. The worst part was that he still wasn't actually good at fighting. Chun, Master Corvain's voice interrupted his thoughts as he made his way slowly across the training ground. The ancient Saurian instructor approached with his usual measured pace, but there was something different in his bearing. You will join me for individual instruction today. Marcus blinked in surprise. Master Corvain was legendary throughout the academy, but he never offered personal training to any student. The privilege was supposedly reserved for the absolute elite, those destined for military leadership or diplomatic service among the galaxy's most dangerous regions. Master, I think there's been a mistake, Marcus said carefully. My performance in class has been unique, Master Corvain finished. Which is precisely why you require specialized instruction. Follow me. They walked to a private training chamber that Marcus had never seen before, deep in the Academy's oldest section. The walls were covered with ancient weapons from 100 different worlds, and the floor bore the scars of countless practice sessions. Master Corvain activated a privacy shield that would prevent their conversation from being overheard or recorded. Sit. The instructor commanded, gesturing toward a meditation cushion. Marcus obeyed, still unsure why he was here. Master Corvain settled across from him with a fluid grace that marked all Saurian movement. For a long moment, the ancient warrior simply studied Marcus with those penetrating yellow eyes. Do you know why you have been able to accomplish what you have? Master Corvain asked finally. Marcus thought about the question seriously. Study? Preparation? Desperation. All true, but incomplete, Master Corvain replied. You have succeeded because you fight like no other species in the galaxy. Not because you're stronger or faster, but because you're willing to accept damage in order to inflict it. I don't understand. Master Corvain gestured toward a wall display that showed the anatomical profiles of various Federation species. Every warrior race has evolved specific combat advantages. Saurians have natural armor, and powerful strikes. Thraxians have size and berserker fury. Zolani have speed and multiple limbs. Karathi have energy resistance and tactical coordination. Marcus nodded, familiar with the standard classifications. But humans, Master Corvain continued, humans have something else entirely. You have the ability to endure punishment while maintaining tactical focus. Other species become less effective when injured. Pain clouds their judgment. Wounds slow their reactions. Fear compromises their strategy. Humans become more dangerous. That doesn't sound like an advantage, Marcus said. It sounds like a psychological disorder. Master Corvain's mouth curved in what might have been a smile. Perhaps. But it is an extraordinarily effective disorder in combat situations. You demonstrated this against both Zarkoth and Vextar. As the fights progressed and you accumulated damage, your tactical thinking became clearer, not more confused. Your willingness to take risks increased rather than decreased. Marcus thought about his recent fights, remembering the strange clarity that had come over him in the most desperate moments. He'd always assumed it was adrenaline or panic, but Master Corvain seemed to be suggesting something else. You believe humans are naturally better at fighting when they're losing? I believe humans are naturally better at fighting when they have nothing left to lose, Master Corvain corrected. It is a crucial distinction. Most species fight to preserve themselves. They become more cautious as danger increases. Humans fight to accomplish their objective regardless of personal cost. The closer you come to defeat, the more willing you become to sacrifice everything for victory. The instructor activated a holographic display showing combat footage from across the galaxy. I've spent the last 3 weeks studying human military history. Your species has a documented pattern of achieving impossible victories when facing overwhelming odds. You call it different names, berserker rage, desperate courage, last stands, but it is always the same phenomenon. The display showed scenes from Earth's wars, humans charging machine gun nests, holding impossible positions against superior forces, continuing to fight long after tactical doctrine said they should surrender. Other species fight until defeat becomes probable. Master Corvain continued. Humans fight until defeat becomes inevitable. Sometimes that extra margin makes all the difference. Marcus stared at the images, seeing his own desperate tactics reflected in the actions of human warriors throughout history. So what are you suggesting? That I learn to get beaten up more efficiently. I'm suggesting that we develop a combat system specifically designed around human psychological and physiological advantages. Not trying to make you fight like a Saurian or a Thraxian, but creating techniques that work best for a species that becomes more dangerous as the situation becomes more desperate. Over the following weeks, Master Corvain's individual training sessions transformed Marcus's understanding of combat. Instead of learning to avoid damage, he learned to absorb it efficiently while maintaining offensive capability. Instead of retreating when injured, he practiced advancing. Instead of becoming more cautious as fights progressed, he trained to become more aggressive. The techniques they developed were unlike anything in the standard Nexus combat curriculum. There were holds that accepted temporary pain in exchange for superior positioning. Striking patterns that deliberately expose the user to counterattacks while creating opportunities for devastating responses. Movement sequences that used the fighter's own momentum against them in ways that required extraordinary pain tolerance to execute. This is insane, Marcus gasped during one particularly brutal training session. He was covered in bruises, and his left shoulder throbbed from a practice throw, but he was also beginning to understand how the techniques work together. No sane species would fight this way. Precisely, Master Corvain agreed, which is why it will be effective. Every species in the galaxy understands conventional combat psychology, the desire to minimize risk, preserve oneself, fight efficiently. They will not know how to respond to an opponent who deliberately chooses the most dangerous option available. As Marcus's training progressed, word began to spread through the academy again. Students reported seeing him in the practice chambers at all hours, working alone or with Master Corvain on techniques that seemed designed to inflict as much damage on the practitioner as on their opponent. The rumors grew increasingly wild. The human was learning secret death techniques. He was being trained as a special operative. He was developing a new form of combat that would revolutionize military thinking. The truth was both simpler and more complex. Marcus was learning to fight like a human instead of trying to fight like other species. The distinction made all the difference. The opportunity to demonstrate his progress came sooner than expected. News arrived that a delegation from the Hegemony, a militant alliance of species that rejected Federation ideals, would be visiting Valorak's academy. It was supposedly a diplomatic mission, but everyone knew it was really an intelligence-gathering operation. The Hegemony wanted to assess Federation military capabilities by observing their training methods and student performance. As part of the visit, the delegation would observe demonstration matches between Academy students and Hegemony warriors. It was meant to be a friendly cultural exchange, but the underlying competition was obvious. The Hegemony had never accepted that the Federation's diverse approach to warfare could match their own militaristic specialization. Master Corvain approached Marcus 3 days before the demonstrations. The Academy administration has requested that you participate in the exhibition matches. Your unconventional techniques will provide an interesting perspective on Federation combat doctrine. Marcus felt a familiar knot of anxiety in his stomach. Who will I be fighting? A Hegemony combat spécialiste. Species unknown, but certainly selected for their ability to demonstrate superiority over Federation students. Master Corvain's expression was carefully neutral. You may decline if you wish. No one would question your decision. Marcus thought about the offer. Declining would be the smart choice. He'd already proven his point, already gained the respect of his classmates, already changed how the Academy viewed human potential. He had nothing left to prove and everything to lose, which was exactly why he couldn't refuse. I'll do it, Marcus said. When do I fight? The day of the demonstrations arrived with all the pomp and ceremony the Academy could muster. The main arena had been expanded to accommodate thousands of spectators, including faculty, students, visiting dignitaries, and media representatives from across the Federation. The atmosphere was electric with anticipation and barely concealed tension. The Hegemony delegation consisted of 12 beings from 6 different species, all chosen for their military excellence and their psychological impact on observers. They were larger, more heavily armed, and more openly aggressive than typical diplomatic visitors. Their leader was a massive Vorthak whose chitinous exoskeleton had been decorated with the trophies of defeated enemies. The early demonstration matches proceeded exactly as expected. Hegemony warriors dominated Federation students through superior aggression, specialized training, and what appeared to be complete disregard for conventional combat ethics. The matches were supposed to be non-lethal exhibitions, but several Federation students required emergency medical attention after facing opponents who seemed to interpret demonstration as public execution. By the time Marcus's match was announced, the mood in the arena had shifted from anticipation to grim determination. The Federation needed a victory, something to demonstrate that their approach to warfare was viable in the face of Hegemony brutality. Marcus walked into the arena to thunderous applause from the Federation spectators. The Hegemony delegation watched him with obvious amusement. A single human against their finest warrior was clearly meant to be the closing humiliation of their visit. His opponent was unlike anything Marcus had ever faced. Kexthal was a Devastator-class Mordok, a species bred specifically for warfare by the Hegemony's genetic engineers. 9 feet tall and covered in natural armor plating, with 4 arms ending in razor-sharp talons and a tail that could shatter reinforced barriers. Worse, the Mordok had been cybernetically enhanced. Marcus could see the telltale gleam of neural interface ports and artificial muscle enhancement systems. Kexthal didn't speak as they took their positions. His red eyes simply assessed Marcus with the cold calculation of a predator sizing up prey. When he moved into his combat stance, servomotors whined softly as his cybernetic enhancements activated. The match rules were announced: victory by submission, incapacitation, or referee intervention. But Marcus could see in Kexthal's eyes that the Mordock had no intention of stopping at submission. Master Corvain served as the Federation's referee, his ancient face showing no emotion as he raised his hand to begin the match. Fighters ready? Marcus settled into the opening stance of what Master Corvain had designated Form Zero, the experimental human combat style they developed together. Unlike the traditional forms taught at the Academy, Form Zero assumed that the practitioner would be outmatched in every conventional category. It was built around the principle of accepting damage to create opportunities, of using desperation as a tactical advantage rather than a liability. Kexthal's stance was pure hegemony doctrine, aggressive, overwhelming, designed to end fights through superior force applied without mercy or restraint. Begin, Master Corvain commanded. Kexthal moved with mechanical precision, his forearms creating a whirlwind of strikes that would have shredded any normal opponent in seconds. His cybernetic enhancements allowed him to attack within human speed while maintaining perfect coordination between all four limbs. Marcus didn't try to block or evade the assault. Instead, he stepped into it. The crowd gasped as Marcus deliberately moved within range of Kexthal's devastating attack pattern. The Mordock's claws raked across Marcus's torso, leaving bloody furrows in their wake. A normal fighter would have been dismembered by the assault, but Marcus wasn't fighting like a normal fighter. As Kexthal's claws found their mark, Marcus was already moving to his real objective, the nerve cluster behind the Mordock's secondary elbow joint. It was a target that could only be reached by someone willing to accept significant damage, and only by someone who understood cybernetic anatomy well enough to know where the artificial systems interfaced with biological ones. Marcus's fingers found the precise spot they were seeking and pressed with every ounce of knowledge Master Corvain had drilled into him. For a moment, nothing happened. Then, Kexthal's left arms went completely dead as conflicting signals from his cybernetic and biological systems created a cascade failure. The Mordock roared in fury and swung his functional right arms in a devastating counterattack. Marcus took the full force of the blow across his chest, feeling ribs crack under the impact, but he used the momentum to position himself for his next strike. This time he targeted the main power coupling for Kexthal's neural enhancement system, a point located at the base of the skull that was heavily armored but accessible to someone willing to get close enough to be killed in the process. The technique worked perfectly. Kexthal's cybernetic systems began shutting down in sequence as their power supply was disrupted. The massive warrior staggered, his enhanced coordination failing as his artificial reflexes went offline. But the Mordock was far from finished. Even without his cybernetic advantages, he remained a formidable opponent. 9 feet of natural armor, biological weaponry, and genetically enhanced aggression. He adapted quickly, switching to purely biological combat techniques that didn't rely on his failing enhancement systems. What followed was 13 seconds of the most brutal hand-to-hand combat ever recorded in a Federation arena. Marcus, bleeding from multiple wounds and fighting with at least 3 broken ribs, matched Kexthal blow for blow using techniques that seemed to come from humanity's most primitive instincts. He didn't try to outfight the Mordock. Instead, he outsuffered him, accepting damage that would have incapacitated any other species while continuing to press his attack. The turning point came when Kexthal, frustrated by his inability to put down the seemingly unkillable human, made a tactical error. He committed to a devastating finishing move that would have ended any normal fight, a four-armed crushing attack that brought all his natural weapons to bear simultaneously. Marcus had been waiting for exactly this moment. Instead of trying to escape or defend against the attack, he stepped deeper into it, allowing Kexthal's arms to close around him while positioning his own hands against the Mordock's throat. What happened next would be debated by combat analysts for years afterward. Marcus applied a pressure technique that Master Corvain had classified as theoretical, a neural disruption pattern that required precise anatomical knowledge and the ability to maintain focus while sustaining what should have been fatal damage. Kexthal's grip tightened around Marcus, crushing his already damaged ribs and driving the breath from his lungs. But the human held on, his fingers finding the exact neural pathways that controlled the Mordok's breathing reflex. The crowd watched in stunned silence as both fighters locked in what appeared to be mutually assured destruction. Kexthal was slowly crushing Marcus to death, but the human's neural disruption was causing the Mordok's respiratory system to shut down. It became a question of who would succumb first, the human to physical trauma or the Mordok to oxygen deprivation. The answer came after 13 eternal seconds. Kexthal's grip loosened as his nervous system finally succumbed to Marcus's relentless pressure technique. The massive warrior collapsed, unconscious but alive, his enhanced physiology having kept him fighting longer than should have been possible. Marcus staggered backward, swaying on his feet, but somehow still conscious. Blood dripped from numerous wounds, his breathing was labored from his damaged ribs, and his vision was blurred from exhaustion and blood loss. But he was standing. The arena erupted in chaos. Federation spectators screamed their approval while the hegemony delegation sat in stunned silence. Even the most optimistic observers had expected the human to last perhaps 30 seconds against a Devastator-class opponent. Instead, Marcus had won. Master Corvain was the first to reach him as he finally collapsed. The ancient Saurian's expression was unreadable as he checked Marcus's injuries, but there was something that might have been pride in his ancient eyes. 13 seconds, Master Corvain said quietly as medical teams rushed to attend both fighters. That's how long you controlled a fight that should have been impossible to win. As Marcus was lifted onto a medical stretcher, he caught sight of the hegemony delegation. Their leader, the massive Vorthak, was studying footage of the fight on a portable display. There was no amusement in his expression now, only the calculating look of a military strategist who had just witnessed something that would require significant revision of tactical doctrine. Later, as Marcus recovered in the medical bay, reports began filtering in from across the galaxy. The footage of his victory had spread through the galactic network even faster than his previous fights. Military academies on dozens of worlds were requesting copies of the combat footage. The Federation Military Command had opened formal inquiries into developing human-optimized combat doctrines. More significantly, other human students at military academies throughout Federation space had begun reporting different treatment from their alien classmates. The casual dismissal was gone, replaced by cautious respect and genuine curiosity about human capabilities. But the most important change was happening right there at Valorax Academy. Master Corvain had been authorized to develop a formal curriculum around human adaptive combat techniques. Students from multiple species were requesting permission to audit the classes, wanting to understand how the principles might apply to their own fighting styles. Vextar was among the first to sign up. I want to understand, the massive Thraxian explained when he visited Marcus in the medical bay. How you made losing look like winning. How you turned desperation into strength. These are not concepts my people understand naturally, but perhaps they are concepts we should learn. As word spread and more students requested access to the experimental curriculum, Marcus realized that something fundamental had shifted in how the galaxy viewed human potential. It wasn't that humans had suddenly become the strongest or fastest or most naturally gifted warriors. All the old limitations remained true. But they'd proven something else entirely, that sometimes the most dangerous opponent isn't the one who never falls down, but the one who refuses to stay down. That sometimes victory goes not to the superior force, but to the one willing to pay any price to achieve their objective. In 13 seconds of impossible courage, Marcus had shown the galaxy that humans didn't need to be the biggest or strongest or fastest to be formidable. They just needed to be willing to endure what others could not, to continue fighting when others would surrender, to find strength in the very desperation that would cripple other species. And across the galaxy, a new understanding was taking root. When humans said they would fight to the last breath, they weren't making a threat or a boast. They were making a promise. The legend was complete, but the transformation it would bring to galactic military thinking was just beginning. In academies and war colleges throughout Federation space, a new question was being asked. What might be possible if human adaptive combat techniques were formally studied, refined, and taught to other species? The answer would reshape how the galaxy understood the relationship between physical strength and tactical effectiveness. And at its heart would always be the memory of one human teenager who had refused to quit, even when quitting was the only rational choice available. Especially then,